welcome to our second edition of Vikings Mail Call with Pete Bercich. I'm Tom Moore from BikeFans.com, and we want to welcome Pete back from a hot and steamy Arrowhead Stadium. Hey, Pete, how was the trip?
No, it was good. Like you said, it was hot. I mean, at the end of the game, when I took my tie off, it was soaking wet. I mean, 103 before the game and 97 later in the game. There were some elements to be dealt with, that's for sure.
Makes you appreciate that we're building a dome, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does, and that's going to be interesting as this season goes on. In fact, the question I get a lot nationally is, home games in Minnesota in the winter, and I remember last year, if the Vikings would have had a wild card game outside on wild card weekend, it was 20 below zero. So that would have been the coldest game ever played in the NFL had they had an outdoor home wild card game last year. So possibilities there, and it's something that the elements are something they're going to have to learn to deal with all season.
Well, as you said last week, we're all going to say we look forward to it. We'll see how many of us show up when it's snowing out there.
Exactly. Come out shirtless in December.
Exactly. Right? Well, Pete, we got a lot of questions from the fans this week, so I say we get at it.
All right, let's do it.
All right, great. Well, I'm sure you saw that Mike Zimmer came out on Monday and announced that Matt Castle would be the opening day starter. Any surprise there? And from what you saw, did Teddy Bridgewater do enough in the first 3 preseason games to warrant any consideration for the starting spot? Or was this a pretty easy decision for the coaches to make?
Well, yeah, I think nationally it might have been a bit of a surprise, and I think nationally people thought it might have been a little bit more of a competition, but anybody who's a Vikings fan and has been paying attention, has watched, has seen that Matt Castle's played a really good preseason. I don't think he necessarily had his sharpest game against Kansas City, but coming out of the gate against Oakland and then against Arizona, he played very, very well. And then you look at last week, one of our topics before the games that we discussed was we need to see a deep ball. I mean, because if you have, again, Adrian Peterson in the backfield, defenses are going to be trying to stop the run. You got one-on-ones on the outside, and you got to take advantage of it. And I think, with Jerome Simpson and especially with Cordero Patterson, if you give Castle time, he'll beat you deep. And that was a play-action pass. It was blocked very well, and he got it deep to Cordero for the big touchdown. So it's a big pass to Rudolph that he's hit, and a big pass to Cordero that he's hit in the preseason. Teddy is played very, very well. He continues to improve. He'll improve in the course of a game. You don't even have to wait till film. You don't have to wait for a week of practice to see him improve on things. He does it, right in the game. Against Arizona, he missed a back shoulder fade to Jerome Simpson. He comes back a few minutes later and throws the exact correct throw to Rodney Smith. So he's a solid player. He's improving every single week. But, this game is going to pick up steam now. Once this preseason's over, you get in the regular season, the game planning, everything just goes into high gear. And if he was just a rookie and he's going to start opening day, it's a lot to handle. I really think the best thing for him is to take this time and learn the offense.
Yeah, well, as encouraging as Bridgewater's preseason performance has been, some of the fans are saying it's not as impressive because he's doing it against the number 2 and number 3 defenses of the opponents. And my question for you is, how much do you discount Bridgewater's success for playing against non-first-teamers?
I don't know if I'll discount his success because, again, he's out there with second team and third team players too. The rule of thumb is one thing that I always think about or say is that if you have a guy that's going to start, so if Castle's going to be your starter or whomever is going to be your starter, or if you have a real true competition, the first team quarterback, then he has to play with the first team offense. Because the timing of the routes with the receivers, the timing of the routes, the timing of the runs with the running backs, those things change when you're dealing with students out there. And so is it the best way to get him prepared? If they were preparing him to be a starter and that was a real solid, toss-up type competition, then I would have said you need to get him a start in the preseason and get a good quarter or so, or at least half of the game with the ones, just to see what he can do and how he can do it. So, is it slowing his development to playing with the 2s and 3s? I don't think so, but I don't think it necessarily prepares him to be a starter in the NFL like it would if he was out there with the 1s in the preseason.
Got you. Well, if nothing else, Viking fans like to speculate. And so, last week, Rams quarterback Sam Bradford went down with a season-ending knee injury, and Viking fans immediately suggested, hey, Christian Ponder would be great to be traded to the Rams. And when I think of that, Pete, from your perspective, if the Vikings traded Ponder, what's the realistic draft choice compensation you think they could get for him? And if a trade like that were to happen with a Ram team, would Ponder really be an upgrade to veteran quarterback Sean Hill?
let me go to the second half of that first. I saw Sean Hill. We brought him in. He was a quarterback from Maryland. He reminds me a little bit of Brad Johnson in a way of how he's developed and become a good quarterback. Mm-hmm. I really don't think if you had the two of them and you looked at them and evaluated the two, I think Sean Hill would be the better quarterback. I mean, Ponder does have some experience, but Sean has at least been there throughout the preseason, and he's going to make very, very good decisions. He's a good quarterback. Sean Hill is a pretty darn good quarterback. They're going to need some depth, though. They're going to absolutely need some depth because, if something happens to Sean, now you're looking at third stringer. So they're going to need to bring in an experienced quarterback to stand and take snaps behind Sean Hill. So what that situation is, I don't know yet. I'm not wrote on the St. Louis team, but they may be looking to bring somebody in with some experience, and Ponder is exactly that kind of guy. He's led a team to a playoff berth. He's played plenty of games in the NFL, so it wouldn't be new to him. He would have to learn the system, which would take some time, but he'd be a guy out there that wouldn't just, the term that comes to my head I can't use on the radio, but he wouldn't freak out or do something, just go blank when he's out there because he's played in the NFL.
Right. And when you look at it, it's a big note of contention. If you're the GM of the Rams and you say, hey, I'm going to make this trade, in this case for depth, because you go ahead and let Sean Hill start, what do you give up for a Ponder?
Maybe a late-round draft pick. I don't think the Vikings are interested in letting him go. Mm-hmm. In any case, when you have a quarterback with his experience, all it takes is, look at the Rams, all it takes is one injury. If something happens to Castle, you're looking at Teddy Bridgewater, and then you'd have Ponder right behind him, and that's when the value comes in. So the kind of compensation that you'd want to get for a guy with Ponder's type experience. Now, if it's McLeod Bethel Thompson, who's your number 3, then you might let him go for almost anything just because the guy's never played a game. But that experience, I think, would require a little bit more in compensation for a trade, and I just don't know if the Rams would be willing to give that up.
Got it. Well, when we look at some of our fans, one of the questions we got was from Ivar in Los Angeles, and he says, Pete, it looks like fullback Jerome Felton may be on the bubble, and I understand Adrian Peterson really likes Felton, but Zimmer wants Peterson's lead blocker to catch passes too. So his question is, does AP have the clout to say, hey, I want Felton, and to get his way, and if so, would he use that clout with a Zimmer or Norv Turner?
There's an old saying about how players play and coaches coach, and you can't let the inmates run the asylum. And so for Adrian Peterson, that's not a decision that he's allowed to make. If he's asked that question, then he can absolutely stand up and give his preference. I think he's earned the right to be heard. You got to earn that right. And I think he's done that. And it's taken him a number of years to learn to run behind a fullback. In his first couple seasons, he very rarely ran behind a fullback, but over the last couple years, he's seen some success with that. So I don't think you're going to see that much out of this Norv Turner offense, and I think that's what's going to end up dictating what Jerome Felton's going to be and what his future is going to be. Matt Asiata came to the NFL, was a tailback, and they moved him to fullback, so he's played a little bit of fullback, and if you're not going to do a ton of it every single week, Asiata might be, a guy who can play fullback. But I think, again, it's going to come down to Norv Turner, what he has in mind for a scheme, and, if Felton doesn't fit, it might be a problem for him. And the other part of the equation is that they're paying him more than minimum. So they're paying him quite a bit of money, and it may end up being a financial situation because if Felton is only going to play 10% or 15% of the snaps on offense, is it worth the amount of money that they're paying him?
All right. Well, obviously you were a coach for the Vikings for several years. Did you ever have that situation where a player came up and lobbied for you to put in a good word for somebody to stay?
No, I never had that much pull in the locker room. I've heard it before. There are guys that play that take it upon themselves to play GM for a little while or play head coach and, believe that or think that their opinions need to be heard. And, it depends on the player. If you got a Randy Moss, Chris Carter or Randall McDaniel or something, you're gonna listen to what they have to say, but it doesn't mean you're gonna do it.
Right. Well, as we turn to Carl from Minnesota, he wants to know, is Jerome Simpson really at risk of being cut with the looming suspension he's got, coupled with the emergence of the second-year guys, Adam Thielen and Rodney Smith?
I think that for Jerome, if it was going to be a 6-game suspension, then I would say yes. And I think he's definitely in trouble or in question. With a 3-game suspension looming, I don't think so. And I think that if anybody, Thielen's the guy that's really stuck out, and his ability to return punts Even if you go with Marcus Sherrills, at least you have a guy that can back him up. And Rodney Smith, again, if you're going to talk about Teddy, you got to look at Rodney Smith the same way, saying, hey, Rodney Smith's done some good things, but it's always been against the 2s and the 3s. Mm-hmm. So I think he's a raw prospect, and I think he's a perfect candidate for practice squad. So I would assume Rodney Smith, if he can make it through waivers, will still be on his team, but in the form of a practice squad player.
Yeah, you mentioned Thielen. Obviously, you were there in Kansas City to see some of his punt returns. Does his effective performance there put any pressure on Marcus Sherrill's position?
Oh, of course it does. And that's kind of the beauty of the whole thing, is that now you have options. Now, whether catching a punt in a preseason game and catching a punt in a regular season game, it's the same ball, same everything, but it's just different. And if there's one thing that you have to be able to do is trust who's returning the football, especially on punt return, to make good decisions. A kickoff return guy, he either has to bring it out of the end zone or he doesn't. A punt return guy, you can't be catching the ball inside the 10. You have to know when you can come up and fair catch it and when you want to return it, and then you also have that ball security. And it's a lot harder to catch a punt than it is a kickoff. So whoever ends up back there needs to be a proven good decision maker. So I think Marcus Sherrills will get the nod early, unless Thielen has done a ton in practice and has impressed the coaches enough. But like I said, at least if something happens to Marcus, if Marcus becomes the starting nickel and you're in a game situation where you're playing 65% of the snaps at nickel, then maybe you could throw Thielen in there and give the guy a break. So either way, it's a great thing for the entire team, just because of the fact that you have another body, a guy you trust.
Yeah. Well, as we turn to Cale from Idaho, he wants to know, Pete, we should be a great play-action team with Adrian Peterson in the backfield, but we've been horrible at it the last couple of years. What is it about the man-blocking scheme that's likely to make play-action more effective?
I don't know if it's a blocking scheme as much as it is the guy that's throwing the football, and this is one of the things for, with Christian that I just never could figure out. I mean, you have one of the best route runners or slant route runners in Greg Jennings in the league. And your slants and your outs and your quick outs and your deep outs are going to be the type of plays with the play action. And then, stuff over the middle with Kyle Rudolph would just absolutely make sense. And for Christian, they just never ran a lot of slants with Christian. It's not as if it wasn't in the playbook of the coaching staff last year. It's just that he may not have been very good at them. Or for some, they saw him in practice and just didn't like it. And that's a huge part of the offense that should be a big threat. We saw what Favre would do with the slant. I mean, he would kill you with the slant. I mean, you'd throw the ball at Jennings, and Jennings would just go. So it's a huge part of the offense that needs to be there. And that's a really good question. It's a really, really good question, because we haven't seen a lot of slants out of this offense. So hopefully with Castle and Jennings, and with Adrian Peterson back there, that play will emerge.
Well, as we move off into the Dakotas, Tim from Fargo wants to know, should fans expect to see a noticeable improvement from the Vikings defense this season? And if so, how much of an improvement, and would you anticipate the pass or the run defense to see the most improvement?
Well, the pass defense will be the most improved because we were at the bottom of the league. I do think that this defense will be somewhere in the top half of the league. Now, that's maybe top 10. I don't know. I think that's maybe a bit of a stretch, but I think the potential is there. But at least be in the top half of the NFL. I mean, the only thing you got going against you is you're going to be seeing 3 really good offenses in your division twice a year, so that's not going to help. But I would think if they can be somewhere around 15, that'd be, number one, a huge move, and number two, I think it'd be great improvement. It would be where I think that they would end up. And if there's an aspect of the defense that's improved, it's been the coverage side, and it's a different philosophy. It's more man-to-man, and even when they play zone against certain routes or certain patterns that they see, they will convert zone into man, where they're jumping the guy that comes through their zone. And you're seeing that in the preseason with throw, catch, tackle. A lot of more passes are being contested. I think Captain Munderland was a fantastic free agent signing because he's a hell of a player. And above that, he's got a great attitude. He's a leader. He's got a meanness to him, a toughness to him. I think he's getting a little contagious back there. So I think that Xavier Rhodes, I think, has improved quite a bit. So I think those 2 corners are really the guys that stand out. Now, who's going to be the number 3? I don't know. That's the big question. And if you have a weakness with your number 3 corner, then teams are going to run a lot more 3 wides and nickel on base downs to get that person on the field.
Yeah, well, you do realize that during that explanation, you lost a good number of fans who had to go get a drop cloth when you said top half after they've been, 31st in the league. They were drooling all over the place.
Well, yeah, no, I really do. I think that this team, this defense should be somewhere around the middle of the pack, if not better. And I think you're going to see that much of an improvement.
That sounds good. Well, as we close out this week's conversation, Pete, we have perhaps our most important question for you yet. And I know you're a big Iron Maiden fan, so as a public service to the fans that you're trying to convert to get them to come over to the dark side, what is the one song they should download to their playlist?
Oh, my God. Probably Run to the Hills. It's, that's probably the best one. It's my favorite.
And why?
I don't know. It's kind of everything that Maiden is. It's talking about the struggles of the Native Americans in the United States from both sides of the story. So that's what Maiden does. They teach history. It's always kind of tied to real life situations. And hear Bruce Dickinson sing like he does. I mean, that chorus and the notes he can hit and carry, it's pretty amazing. So it's probably one of my favorite Maiden songs.
All right, guys, you heard what you're supposed to go out and get. Now, Pete, the last thing is for you is, as a connoisseur of the heavier metal sounds, how does a music conversation go between you and the Hall & Oates loving Paul Allen?
It doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, I'm in the plane. I go in, I put my headphones in, I listen to a band called Death Clock, which is it's a cartoon called Metalocalypse, but the band's called Death Clock, and I'll fall asleep listening, and PA is, 5-6 rows ahead of me listening to his R&B or whatever he listens to, and, we don't talk music because he doesn't know his rear end from a hole in the ground when it comes to music.
Well, with that music lesson, we bring a wrap to Pete Bercich's Viking mail call for this week. And I want to remind fans that Pete will be on the radio and television simulcast of the Vikings preseason game against the Tennessee Titans at 7 p.m. on Thursday, August 28th. And you can also keep up to date on both NFL and college happenings by visiting Pete's football website at PeteBFootball.com or by following him on Twitter at Pete Bercich. So until next week, I'm Tom Moore along with Pete Bercich. So long, everyone.